I've worked, I think, just about every candidate I've worked on, except that one city council race I just mentioned, was the endorsed candidate by Stonewall Democrats. Um, and it's always been, politically, the LGBT community has always been, one of my biggest allies in every campaign I've ever worked on. Mm-hmm. And there's been, lots of issues that have come up. I know we've also have a resolution pending right now at the Erie County Legislature for the same domestic partnership benefits. Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay.
I think it's important to have a plan and work within the Senate to make sure that we come up with a plan to actually pass it. And we can't talk about marriage equality without talking about those reforms we talked about. Part of the reason why it failed is because the only people that could call it for a vote was the majority leader. And a lot of the reasons why it failed were because people who want to campaign on that issue, people who want to work their senators on that issue, were left to go just to the majority leaders and say, can you please let us pass this? But throughout our history, civil rights have never been handed down to us by, I think there's a good quote that they don't come from benevolent leaders. They're fought for and they're organized for and they're won. And that's part of the reason why we need reform, so that people can actually have access to their legislators who can make meaningful reform. Marriage equality is just a great example right now of that problem. There's another really important one out there right now, and I'm sure there's others that I either am not aware of right now or I'm not remembering, but the one important one right now is the Dignity for All Students Act. And what this law would do is, it's surprisingly not already passed, but all it would do is enable and require schools to have a procedure in place to deal with specific bullying and specific discriminatory acts by students against people based on some of these protected classes. Sexual orientation, gender expression would be included in that. And this is important for obvious reasons, that we don't want young folks going through that kind of problems. There's going to be bullying in every school around the country, around the world, but when it's bullying based on one of these specific protected classes, we need to have a special way to deal with that. And we need to have people that are able to deal with both the bullier and the victim, because they have special needs. Both of them are going to have special needs. One is going to need extra support to deal with it. Another is going to need maybe support, or some education or some discussion about what's really going on and why it's not okay. And I don't think that this bill has any opposition. There's no one that's out there saying I'm in favor of bullying. But that's why these reforms are so important. It can't happen because we set up a transactional system of legislating, and nobody is prioritizing the Dignity for Students Act, because they would have to go to the leader of their house and they would have to have some quid pro quo in order to get this bill on the floor and passed. And it's just not happening, and that's part of the reason why that reform is so critical. I do support it, and I spoke at the Transgender Day of Remembrance in support of that bill, in addition to the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which is the federal, I don't know if it's this identical version, but basically the federal level right now, ENDA would cover gender expression within there, and what GENDA would do on a state level is provide for gender expression as one of the protected classes that we already protect, including sex, race, disability, sexual orientation. Would add gender expression for that. So I spoke out in favor of that. Like marriage equality, I think that's something that I would vote for, certainly, co-sponsor, certainly, work within the Senate and with activists to make sure we get that passed, because that's an important part of marriage equality, is the non-discrimination acts throughout the civil rights movement, going back until when we first started protecting classes. Those non-discrimination laws helped mainstream society experience relationships that they wouldn't otherwise have in their normal lives, because all of a sudden it wasn't okay to deny someone a night stay in a hotel, a meal at a restaurant, a job promotion, on the basis of one of these classes. And once we do that, people start to realize the harm that this discrimination is causing, and they start to have relationships with folks that they may not have in their lives, and public will always catches up with what's right. It always does, and it will if we make these protections.